Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So here is my review of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2 entirely. I want to talk about the entire season here and give my final review on the season. It's been exactly 1 week since Season 2 has aired, and so I thought I would give it some time to sort of, I guess, settle a little bit, just start to, focus on some other things and then start to think about Season 2 again and just sort of think about what I liked and what I didn't like. And so, yeah, I'm going to give my overall review at the very end of this video, like a rating, I guess, and then talk about some of the issues and some of the stuff that I did actually really like about the season here throughout this review. So before any further, make sure to be a subscriber if you do want to get all my Walking Dead content like this. Now, this season here, Season 2 definitely had a lot of issues, and I think that it wasn't necessarily set up properly going into the season here, because first of all, it had to be better than Season 1, right? Which was a really amazing season. A lot of people liked Season 1. And you were also following up, The Ones Who Live, which I would say for the first 5 episodes was really amazing. Honestly, I really enjoyed that show. And then the final episode really just kind of ruined a lot. But after that episode, The Walking Dead was in a very weird place where things didn't seem that exciting. And I would say for the next however many months, it was very, it was hard to get excited about a lot of stuff. It really was. And then I think, the release date of, it's coming out in the summer, but then it didn't. It came out in September. That was definitely an issue, I would say, because a lot of people were looking forward to it coming out in June or July or maybe August, but ended up late September, which I'm totally okay with. I'm okay with it coming out in September or October. I would prefer them to wait until October because, again, I've always said The Walking Dead needs to be airing around this time of year. I think airing earlier in the year just doesn't really work. You want The Walking Dead to be airing around Halloween time, right? Around the fall. So Season 2 really had to put the show on the right track. And I think that with a lot of expectations going into the season here, it was just always sort of, it could have been really amazing, but I think pacing issues and some of the story choices that they made really hurt this season overall. Now, I will say this season was filmed pretty much back to back with Season 1 as well, right? They're filming Season 3 right now, but Season 1 and 2 were filmed back to back. So I know we had to wait a year in between seasons, but I'm pretty sure they filmed, Season 1 pretty much straight up until, halfway through Season 2. I know they had to take a break at some point, and maybe they did take a break basically between Season 1 and 2 for a bit, but it was shot within the same year or year and a half or something like that. I know that a lot of this was finished last year, and so any sort of criticisms that people may have had for Season 1, they couldn't really make any changes for Season 2 because they were filming that season right away. And so I think that for Season 3, they are filming it right now, but it would be easier to make some of those changes now because they can see how people sort of feel about the show overall, right? And so I think that was sort of the thing going into The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2 is that The Walking Dead just wasn't in the best place, and you were having Carol come back, and I think having the title The Book of Carol also hurt the show as well because it's not called The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2. Calling it The Book of Carol makes it feel like it's a different show, and I understand the reason for wanting to have the title there because Carol is also a part of this show. The show should be called The Walking Dead Daryl and Carol or something like that, right? I think if they would have went with that originally, that would have made a lot of sense, though Carol wouldn't have been there right away, right? So maybe you would have done something else, a different title entirely, The Walking Dead Dead City, right? But they went with The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon originally because this was a Daryl spinoff, I guess going into it. And then obviously Carol, Carol was always meant to be on the show, but going into the very first season, you wouldn't have really known that from just watching the show, right? And so I understand why they had the Book of Carol, subtitle there for Season 2, but I just think that subtitle, it wasn't really received that well. I would say most people didn't like it from what I've seen anyways. So Season 2, right from the beginning, I think there was a lot of issues there in terms of also pushing the season back a lot, they pushed it off a couple of months. And so I think the story of the season, I also think, there were a lot of issues there as well. So let's actually talk about the story of Season 2 here. So you have two big stories here. You have Carol, she has to get to France to find Daryl, and then you have Daryl dealing with Pouvoir, and then eventually the Nest. And so those are two pretty big stories there. Now, one of the stories shouldn't be that big, I would say, and that is Carol getting to France. Daryl dealing with Pouvoir and whatnot, that should be the biggest story here of the show, but they really spent a lot of time focusing on Carol and getting her to France, which I totally understand. And this is one of those things where I think if this was 8 episodes or 10 episodes, honestly, the first episode, I really don't mind much, but with how much they focused on her getting there, it just really took up a lot from the Pouvoir storyline, because I do think that the Pouvoir storyline was really, honestly, not the best at all in this season. Like, in season 1, they were really incredible villains. The Super Walker arc was absolutely incredible, but when you go into season 2, I mean, really, they were really cool in like episode 3 and 4, kind of, but that was it. Like, they really weren't the main villains overall. The Nest became like the main villains, and they really weren't great villains. Now, Carol getting to France, that was always going to be an issue, because that was an issue, going into the show originally, was how is Daryl going to get to France? Like, it's going to seem so ridiculous. But I think that overall, they handled it pretty well, and I also think that with Carol getting to France, I think they handled that very well as well. Like, using the plane in the way they did, they stopped off in Greenland for a bit before getting to France. Like, I'm totally okay with that. My issue with it is, when she finds out that Daryl is in France, she's upset about it and is like, how am I ever going to get to France? And then, like, literally, like, a couple of scenes later, she sees a plane and she's like, oh, I'm going to use a plane. Like, when do characters on The Walking Dead ever see planes? Like, you never see planes ever, right? Like, you'll see helicopters sometimes, and only a couple of characters ever really saw a helicopter. It was only ever like one helicopter as well. So, like, that part right there, I think really, honestly, it says a lot about the show overall in terms of how they tell the stories, because there's so many conveniences. There's so many convenient moments that happen throughout the season that it becomes laughable. And I don't like saying that, because usually I can sort of overlook a lot of those moments, and I have a lot, because I think that sometimes it's okay to do stuff like that. But in this season, there were just way too many, like too many moments where you're like, oh, come on, like as if that's going to be happening right there. And so Carol getting to France, like that was always going to be an issue in terms of believability, because Daryl getting there originally was that, but I think a lot of people were willing to sort of accept, her taking the plane and going there, but seeing the plane the way that she did, like that was just honestly just insane. But episode 1, I thought was great. It set up Carol's story very, very well. The whole Carol's lie thing was really amazing. I think the reveal and how they handled that towards the end wasn't the best, though. They kind of rushed through all of it. But the visuals of the show looked absolutely incredible, and that was a thing that stayed throughout the entire season. Like, every single episode, there were a couple moments where you're like, wow, this show looks amazing. Like, this literally looks like a movie. So I think that in terms of the visuals, and honestly, the dialogue in this show is great as well. There were really no lines of dialogue that I can think of right now that were like, oh, a character wouldn't really say that or this and that. My only issue that I've been talking about in the last week anyways is that, no one mentioned Rick or Michonne and like the overall goal of trying to find them, right? Like, there's really no mention of that. So besides that, which again, that's more of an issue with, like, why aren't you sort of connecting everything a little bit more? It's not really an issue with like the dialogue, because it's not like Daryl said, yeah, I was searching for the brave man, right? Like, Daryl never said anything like that. There was not a reference to Rick at all. So I think that in terms of the dialogue in the show, it worked really well. Honestly, I thought it was incredible. And I think Carol's story getting to France, I like the story. I really did. It's just, it took away from the Pouvoir and the Nest story, which the Nest story also, I think, was sort of a storyline, in terms of them becoming villains, that was really not needed. I think that it became something that it really just didn't need to. Because Pouvoir, I would say, like, in the very first season, they were incredible villains. We had so many theories on what the Super Walkers were going to be, how powerful Madame Genet was. And yes, I like her death scene in this season, and I think that the way it happened too, that whole episode after they left the Nest anyways, I thought was incredible. And honestly, I think that was the point of the season where it actually got good, right? Like, I think that at that point there where Daryl and Carol leave the Nest and it's both of them together, I guess trying to find Laurent, at that point, really for the rest of the season, I don't have a lot of issues with the story overall. There's probably pacing things still, but in terms of which characters should get what storyline, this and that, I thought that for the most part, everything was really well done. But again, Pouvoir, this group needed a lot more, because it really seemed like they were a much bigger group, because they are like the biggest group in France, right? Like, they pretty much own all of France. Like, Madame Genet is a very powerful leader, but in season 2, it made it seem like they were really like this small group that were staying in this one place here, that everyone just kind of followed them. Like, the Nest was equal to them, right? And that made no sense, because in season 1, the Nest and what was happening there, they were just like, they were against what Pouvoir was doing, and they didn't have as much power as Pouvoir, but they were going to fight back. And so in season 2, it made it seem like they were really both, I guess, equal in terms of power. And so I thought that was, again, Pouvoir, I feel like, was a big disappointment this season. They were barely around at all. And the Nest becoming villains, I don't understand that. I think that needed to be set up a lot more. And if you're already doing 6 episodes where you have Carol and her journey to France taking up a lot of the story here, then you probably should have just like really ignored a lot of the stuff with the Nest and just kept Pouvoir the villains here of the story. Because when Carol does get to France, like, the story is really incredible. I really like, a lot of the scenes with her and Madame Genet in episode 3. I think that the issue is just how much screen time was devoted to that storyline in the very first like 2 episodes, right? Like first episode and a half, kind of around there. You didn't get to really establish any Pouvoir storyline at all, or really get into, the arc until episode 3, but you ended the whole thing in episode 4, like the episode right after that. And then in episode 5, actually towards the end of episode 4, Pouvoir just goes up to Lo Sang and is like, all right, well, I guess, Madame Genet wasn't the right way. Now your way will be the right way. Like, I guess if anything, that was really bad for dialogue, right? Like, I really was not a fan of that scene at all. And so I think the Pouvoir storyline and the Nest storyline were it was bad. Like, I think a lot of people wanted to see a lot more from Pouvoir, and the Nest and like them becoming villains was just like, I like the idea of it originally, but overall, no, I'm not a fan of it. I really wish that they just didn't do that at all. I think that again, the story got better after episode 4, but it wasn't because Pouvoir was gone. It was more because Daryl and Carol are like now together. And I think episode 5 was overall a solid episode. Episode 6 was probably the best one of the season, but the overall arc in terms of, what they set up in season 1, this is such a big disappointment to that season because of the Super Walker storyline. And so the Super Walkers obviously were really exciting, new variant walkers that we saw that were honestly just absolutely incredible. I think that the whole reveal of them in episode 5 of season 1 was one of the best moments that we've ever really seen, like best like Walker moments that we've ever really seen. Season 2 could have done some really amazing things with it. Like, honestly, I think that in terms of explaining some more of their backstory, why Madame Genet created them, was there a connection to the World Beyond post-credit scene? Why decide to create walkers like this? Like, what is your ultimate goal with these super walkers? Is there a bigger goal that would threaten everyone here? Like, honestly, they just really didn't go down that route at all with this. And it was just like they were used at one point to attack the Nest, and that was basically it. Like, there was literally a key difference with the super walkers this season. In season 1, the super walkers would basically just kill each other, because if you had 2 walkers together, like 2 zombies, like they would just attack each other. But in season 2, whenever they created the super walkers, they never did, right? Like, they only ever went after, I guess, non-walkers, although I guess that's technically not true. And see, that's sort of where, when it comes to a lot of this here, I really, like, I don't understand how the super walkers work, because there was a scene in episode 5 where Daryl created a super walker, and that super walker, he created 2 of them. They basically killed all the walkers. And so I'm like, why would that super walker kill all the walkers, but why wouldn't it kill like another super walker? Because we've seen multiples of super walkers together, right? Like, I don't know if the super walkers know that they're super walkers, and so they know the difference between themselves and like a normal walker. That was really weird. I feel like that was sort of ignored because they wanted to have a scene there of Daryl creating a super walker and killing all the walkers, right? So I just think that in terms of the actual story and the explanations for a lot of these really amazing ideas that they set up in season 1, they just like forgot about a lot of stuff here going into season 2, or just ignored it all and really just went for like entertainment, I would say, overall. Like, oh, this would be so cool to do, so we just got to figure out a way to explain it, but not really thinking logically about how it would all work and how it affects the characters and the story. And there's a lot of moments like that this season, honestly, a lot. And I think Isabel's death is also one of them as well. Like, Isabel's death, I understand if you do want to kill off the character, this season, because maybe you just want to have a shocking moment like that. I still think it's a big mistake, but, if you wanted to do that, fine. But the way they did it, like, this is really honestly similar to how Fear the Walking Dead does deaths like this, right? Like, if you think of the episode where Nick and Madison died, well, it wasn't in the same episode, but the season, like, you killed off Nick and Madison in the very first half of season 4. And that was just honestly insane, because those were 2 really big characters for the season. But it was very similar here, because with Isabel and Madame Genet, they both died in the same episode. And Isabel didn't really need to die. I think she could have had a really amazing role, going forward, going into season 3 or 4. Like, maybe eventually she dies, but I think killing her off this early was just, it didn't make a lot of sense. And the way she died too from Losang was just, honestly, it was just pathetic. Like, really, you're going to do that to that character? That character is absolutely incredible. Like, that was such an easy way to have the character die. And I'm just not a fan of it. I'm really not. And then as soon as they left the nest, it's like they forgot all about Isabel entirely. Like, she was one of the best parts of season 1. And again, even Isabel in season 2 barely got a story. It was almost like they wanted us to sort of forget about the character a little bit. This way, when she died, it was like, well, you know, she's not that big of a character anyways. Like, it shouldn't matter overall. And I just completely disagree with that. Again, that's sort of how I'm interpreting, you know, how they're writing it. Obviously, that's probably not what they're doing, but that's just what it seems like. You know, I think that season 2 overall was not a great season. I think that it was an average season. I think if I were to give it a rating, it would be like a 6 out of 10, maybe a 6.5 out of 10. I couldn't give it a 7 out of 10. Like, season 1 of the show, I would give a solid, like, what, 8.5 to 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed the story overall. I think that there may have been some pacing issues here and there. Again, like, the 6 episode thing is such a big issue. I think that if season 3 is 6 episodes, it's really going to hurt that season as well, because the spinoff so far, what it's shown me is that the 6 episode count is hurting the story a lot. Like, maybe with other shows it works fine, but with The Walking Dead, you know, it has a slower pacing overall. Like, that's how you tell the stories really well, and that's what's always worked. And with the 6 episode count, you end up rushing everything so much where it doesn't feel like The Walking Dead. The characters don't feel like themselves. You know, like Carol, I would say, felt like herself, you know, throughout the entire season, but Daryl never really did. You know, in certain moments, I guess he would. I guess towards the end of the season he did, but I think it's because these characters don't get the time to just sort of, you know, hang out and like talk about this or that. And yes, we did get moments like that, but it wasn't the same as The Walking Dead, where you would get like these episodes where maybe people would say it was a filler episode, but I think having those conversations, talking about this or that to advance the story and just certain things with the characters so that you can really relate with them overall. Maybe nothing happens in the episode, but that's fine, because, you know, it's builds up for something in the future, and The Walking Dead has always done that. It's always been the best at doing that, and it looks like right now with the spinoffs, they're really going in a different direction, because Dead City, that was an issue with that. You know, episode 4, around that point there in season 1, like, it was rushed really fast. The Ones Who Live, the finale was absolutely horrible, and then Daryl Dixon had an issue with them, you know, getting to Paris because they were there so fast. That's the one thing that I will say. With how they travel in season 2, it's much quicker than how they traveled in season 1, which is like already a big issue here. So overall, you know, I will say that season 2 was a mess. I think that there were way too many conveniences when characters would survive, or like things were too easy, or the story was rushed just horribly. And again, was this a bad season? No, but it's an average season. I would rate this a 6 to 6.5 out of 10. I think there were some really great moments, but the pacing overall was horrible, and the small episode count is really hurting these spinoffs. The future does look great. Like, the season 3 trailer honestly blew me away. I was not expecting it to look that good. I think that season could be the best season of the show. It has that potential, but let's hope that it's more than 6 episodes, because, like, maybe it's a better season than season 2, but it's going to run into those same issues where the story is just way too fast and it's just going to end up being too much. And again, like Dead City, I'm so excited that season 2 is 8 episodes. Like, that's going to really, like, I do believe, and I'm very confident that it's going to prove my point that, like, yes, maybe there's an episode where not a lot happens, but it still builds everything properly, right? Like, it's building to a certain moment in the very end. And so I'm hoping that, you know, that's what we get from that season, but we'll have to wait and see where they go. That's the next show here. In terms of Daryl Dixon season 2, I'm really excited for the future. I think that the one thing that the finale did, and that's the one thing that I will say, I guess, before ending this video here, is that Norman Reedus did mention that the finale was like the best 1 hour of anything Walking Dead ever, or whatever. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like that. And I will say I don't agree with that, but I think that episode 6 was the best episode of the season, because episode 4, a lot of things happened. It doesn't mean that it was good, though. And I think that the second half of that episode was great, like really amazing. But the first half, even though there were bigger moments, the whole nest battle was very disappointing. The Superwalkers were very disappointing. And they killed off Isabel, which I just really didn't like how they handled the whole situation, and also, you know, how they told that character's story this season. So I think that overall episode 6 was a really great episode. I think the way they ended Laurent's story in terms of him going back to the Commonwealth, I know it's not the end for Laurent, but just for this season and whatnot, creates a lot of excitement for the future, and also them going to Spain. Honestly, I really think that the trailer as well helped a lot with that, because Daryl in Spain, like, honestly, it looks incredible. And the fact that the subtitle is going to be gone for season 3, it's just going to be called The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon season 3. Just honestly awesome, and I really can't wait for this season. So I'm going to leave it here. Definitely post all your thoughts down below on the second season of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.